When we launched Avenidas Village back in October of 2007, we were just one of 5 village programs in the entire nation, and the first on the West Coast. Today, there are 70 villages in California alone, 200 in the US, and 150 more in development. The need for aging in place support is growing, as the National Aging in Place Council reports that more than 90% of older adults would prefer to age in place rather than move into senior housing. Avenidas Village is ready for those folks on the Mid-Peninsula who want the safety net of Avenidas Village's 24/7 assistance. Tonight, you'll hear the history of how Avenidas Village first came together, and we are so thankful that members of the
Hi, Grammy. Well, it's clear to all of us that have been associated with Avenidas Village that one of the smartest decisions that we made and that the founders were responsible for was to align ourselves with Avenidas, our mothership. It is an extraordinary program. It's some people offhandedly refer to it as Palo Alto's senior center, but Palo Alto provides about maybe a third of the support, and this group has raised another 2/3 of its money from the wider community to put on one of the strongest programs for seniors that exist anywhere in the country. And so we are really, really blessed to be a part of that. It's been a highly compatible partnership for us, and we're grateful for the care and support that we receive from Amy and all of her staff. So thank you. It's hard to believe, but it's now more than 20 years ago that then First Lady Hillary Clinton published her book, It Takes a Village, in which she described her view that the role played by organizations apart from the family to provide nurturing and sustaining and safe environments for children were in many ways just as important and important partners for the families. Now, many of us have come to believe that these lessons that I think really do apply to children are just as applicable to seniors. Seniors and kids have more in common, I think, than we realize. You may remember the comments made by the wonderful violinist Misha Elman on his 70th birthday. He said, "When I made my debut at 12, he said, in Berlin, people used to say, 'Isn't he wonderful for his age?' And now they're beginning to say the same thing again." And you may have seen the recent op-ed in the New Yorker in which the columnist advises that people her age, people who are middle-aged, need to step back and let their parents make their own mistakes. Listen to their featured speaker, Atul Gawande, the author of Being Mortal, talk about the importance of senior villages, in his view, as a part of the spectrum of services that are needed for elderly. So it seems to me, and we've asked Dick Smallwood, who is the current chair of the Avenidas Village Council, who along with his wife Jerry is one of the founding members, one of the founders of the village. We've asked him to chair a brief panel discussion involving some of those important members and their recollection of some of the events leading up to the founding of this wonderful experiment that we're all a part of. So, Dick?
Okay, to get this program underway, we'd like to play a video that was on the air on KQED about 10 years ago. And it'll give you an idea of some of the ideas that lay behind the formation of the village and the view that KQED had of that. So could we have the lights out, please?
Tom Reese and his wife Carolyn experienced the problems of senior care firsthand. Both his father and her mother required help at home that proved difficult and costly. Hoping to spare their own children from similar burdens, the Reeses leaped into action upon hearing of Boston's Beacon Hill project.
So the concept here is to try and put in place those services that a retirement community provides to their members or their residents, but permit that to occur in one's home in case a person does not choose to go into a retirement community. Essentially, we're offering or trying to offer or hope to offer an option to a retirement community.
Reese called together a small group of friends and neighbors to discuss the concept, and their initial talks led them to contact Avenidas, a local senior services center which embraced the project. John Sink is the vice president of programs at Avenidas and explains how the program would enhance what the organization currently offers.
Some folks, notwithstanding the breadth of services that we provide at Avenidas, all the way from volunteer opportunities and computer classes to information and assistance and adult day health care, are not comfortable taking advantage of a senior center services. And this would bring more customization, more choice for older adults, and bring the services out into the community to a greater extent than our current set of services.
A series of focus groups was held in order to gauge interest in a variety of services. And while the results are still being compiled, Reese notes that most fall into three broad categories: healthcare, help around the house, and social activities.
So in healthcare, obviously, people are looking for the ability to obtain assisted living care, the ability to obtain even medical provisions in their home, and medical equipment, and also prescriptions. The living at home services, the chief request was for transportation, taking people from here to there for shopping, to go to the doctor, pharmacy. Also, home services would include home repair, cleaning services. And the social side of it is to develop a sense of the community so that there's more interrelationship among the members of this community for social activities such as going to the theater, dining experiences together, avoiding the isolation which my wife's mother did experience because she was too old at that point to get into any program that would provide the social interaction.
While plans are still being formulated, the still unnamed organization would most likely pre-select service providers and negotiate discounts when possible. A concierge would make arrangements so that participants could call a single source for everything from buying theater tickets to getting a plumber and hiring home health care workers. While participants would still be required to pay for services, the ease of the system could mean the difference between remaining at home or moving into a facility.
Sometimes people need to move out of their homes not because they need 24-hour nursing care, but because they have other needs that are going unmet, making it difficult for them to remain at home. Things like inability to do their shopping by themselves or take care of their medications.
The cost to participants is still being analyzed, but a monthly fee is the most likely scenario. It could be tiered to different levels of service, and while the numbers are far from complete, could range anywhere from $700 to $1,500 annually. Bill Reller and Tom and Ellen Wyman were part of the initial group that met to discuss the proposal and were overwhelmed by the community reaction.
We had one of the first focus groups at our home, and I went around our neighborhood knocking on doors of people I had known for years, but not known personally, intimately. I was stunned that every single home I went to, people immediately said, yes, I want to come, and then they launched into a story about a spouse or a neighbor or a friend or themselves where there really were medical needs. This was on the top of their minds, but they weren't talking about it. And then we thought it would be important to have a few things that are just plain fun so that people would want to join before they have to join.
In the next 40 years, the population of those 80 and older in Palo Alto will double. That's just profound. And if you just think about that it will be overwhelming to the community in the sense that it's really compelled one way or another to do something.
We very much appreciate what Beacon Hill has already done, and they have brought this whole concept to a threshold. But while we're trying to move ahead, we're breaking new ground. We want to move beyond where Beacon Hill is and provide even more for those who want to become members of this new, you might say, concept. And it's a challenge, but this is why we need to have all of the community participating and helping us design what it is they want.
I think that Palo Alto is a great place to try this because, as both Ellen and Tom have said previously, the commitment of people within the community to the community is just enormous. The volunteerism that is here is just very, very high, and there's the average length of residency for the very people we're talking about is long-term, and they want to stay here, and this community means just a tremendous amount to them.
No doubt adjustments will still be made as plans move forward, and many challenges will arise. But Tom Reese sounds an optimistic note.
As to the question of when this is going to begin, we don't have an answer, and that's going to be formulated between our advisory group and Avenidas, and it's going to depend, as we say, on every step in the process being completed satisfactorily and just taking it one step at a time. So we cannot project at this point. But thus far, the important thing is it seems to be a go.
Okay, could we have the lights up, please? Okay, so I'd like to read the names of the founders of the village. And as I read the names, if you are here in attendance, we'd like for you to stand up for a nice round of applause at the end. So the founders were Ed and Margaret Arnold, Hoist and Heidi Baum, Harry Burland, Alan and Marilyn Brown, Robert and Betty Brown, Kenneth and Fran Codispati, Mike and Jean Couch, John and Francis Davis, Tom and Ellen Ehrlich, Salon and Diane Finkelstein, William and Cynthia Floyd, Paul and Jean Garrett, Bob and Jean G., Richard and Nancy Goldcamp, Carol Harrington, Beverly Coburn, Bruce and Ellie Heaster, Walter and Mary McCulloch, Les and Mary Minkus, David and Lynn Mitchell, William Nichols, Tom and Carolyn Reese, Marcia and Fred Remus, Bill and Carolyn Reller, Deborah Rosenberg, Paul and Maureen Roskoff, Nancy and Joel Rosen, Betty Schneider, Dick and Jerry Smallwood, Tom and Ellen Wyman. So let's have a nice round of applause for the founders. There was also a separate group of people that played a key role in developing the village. And these were people that, while they're not necessarily founders, were essential in the design of the new organization. So I'd like to just read some of the names of these key people. Lisa Hendrickson, Jan Murphy, Hal Corral, Marlene Predergast, Mona Miller, Joan Campbell, John Sink, Carrie Martell, Andy Doty, Steve Brandt, John Murden, and Gigi Williams. So a round of applause for those people. So one of the founders who could not be with us tonight is Mary Minkus. And one of our members has written a very nice piece about her early contributions to the foundations of the village. So, is Helen here? Oh, there she is. Okay, good.
Thank you, Dick. Wow, I wish Mary were here to see everybody. Mary was my college roommate, and she's been a paraplegic all of her life. She graduated from Stanford Law School, had a very successful career while she was raising her family. She realized that she and her husband Les would be needing increasing help and support as they got older. And so she heard about Beacon Hill Village, and she wrote and got the toolkit for it and began developing her own ideas about what a village not in Beacon Hill, Boston, but in Palo Alto would be. As she reviewed the toolkit and talked with other people, she realized that there were many who shared her desire to continue to live at home. When she met with them, they shared a variety of views about how such an organization could function, and her idea began to acquire a life of its own. Mary was able to bring to bear the kind of political and negotiation skills that she had developed during her career, and soon she and a small group of other people became founders of the village. Because of Mary's vision, born from both adversity and lifelong experience in solving problems of how to live independently, we are now celebrating 10 years of interacting, helping, growing, evolving, finding solutions, and adjusting to changing needs of members and of Avenidas Village. My husband Dick and I were at the opening party in October 2007 and immediately signed up as members. I can't thank Mary enough for not only anticipating what her own needs might be and how she'd like to address them, but also for ensuring that a great many of us share the result of her vision. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so now we're going to have a panel discussion. I promise we won't go on for too long, but the idea here is to give you some information from some of the early founders of the village and the kinds of decisions and considerations that they made during those early years. So, Lisa Hendrickson, Bruce Heaster, and Tom Reese are the panelists, and I get to ask them questions.
Lisa's going to sit there. We're going to balance the...
I see. Okay, good. All right. You have an extra chair.
Where do you want to be?
You're sitting on the mic.
Yeah, I know.
There you go.
Does it feel good?
No, I'm not used to it.
Okay. All right, great.
My microphone back. It's in your pocket.
I was going to say that it's not...
Microphone.
I'm sorry.
It'd be handy if you passed it back and forth when you were talking, but
You're right. Here.
Mine on.
I was just going to comment, it's unusual to sit on one's mouthpiece.
Was it fun? Never mind. Okay, so first question I'd like to ask the panelists here. What were the key motivating factors that caused you to consider starting a village in Palo Alto?
I read the New York Times article that's been referred to, and after that sent a letter to a bunch of friends who'd had experience in many areas. The letter is dated December 8, 2005. Thereafter, a bunch of us met, and finally, after deciding to go ahead, it became very clear that we did not want to run an organization. And about that same time, Lisa and Mary Minkus, but Lisa Hendrickson, were thinking of doing the same thing. So we got together with Avenidas to pass the burden on to them.
I would like to add that I got one of those letters from Tom, and then Mary came to visit me, and we were pretty busy at Avenidas because we had just opened up the new Rose Kleiner Center in Mountain View, but I knew that these two were not to be avoided and neglected. So we set our minds to figuring out how to make this work, and we did primarily in your living room. Got it done.
I didn't get a letter from Tom. I didn't know who Tom was, but I knew he was a good friend of a neighbor of ours, and they invited us to go to the meeting. And on that one of the first meetings that went on, from a personal standpoint, one of the things that Ellie and I had decided to do is to come off of basically traveling around the world for 20-some years and settle in one place and form a community and be part of an early community. And so the idea of this, plus having our daughter across the country, was what we felt would meet our needs.
Okay. Any other? So why did you decide to form the village as a separate program of Avenidas as opposed to a standalone village?
Well, I didn't want to run a standalone village. And that view was shared by the other friends and people there. And so we needed an established outfit that we thought was necessary to get this underway. There are many of these villages which believe volunteers will sustain them. And many of those villages have failed. So we knew that an organization that knew about seniors, that knew how to take care of them and the ins and outs, would be the place for us to go if we were wise.
You know, it turns out that John Sink and I had spent a lot of time talking about how to broaden Avenidas' reach and connect with those folks in the community that just never walked through our doors on Bryant Street. We knew there were a lot of folks like that, and we also felt we had the capacity. We knew we had the capacity to provide support and help. We couldn't quite figure out how to do it. So when we learned about this village model, it really resonated with us, and we thought that this could be a way for Avenidas to expand on its work in the community and connect with folks in the community that we didn't know. And it was a good bet, because most everybody that joined Avenidas Village, and maybe still, I don't know, had never had anything to do with Avenidas before. So it was a good decision. I will add, though, there was one sort of clincher, and that is when we ran the numbers, and we need a little bit of money to do this, you know. Turns out that Avenidas had a fund for seeding new programs. And when the group learned about that was pretty persuasive.
That's exactly right, because one of the major issues, let me back up. One of the people we spoke with was Woody Ives, who was a founder and substantial supporter of Beacon Hill. And he doubted very much that a village could sustain without serious contributions, donations from members. The fact that we had a pocketbook over here inclined us to agree not to each individual founder send them a bill for $50,000 or $70,000, which is what happened in Boston. They had several very wonderful supporters who put together what is really a community, and it's a social community, and that was another issue that we had to face, whether or not this is going to be widespread geographically, widespread among income groups, and would lower income groups be most attracted, and if they were the group most attracted to our program, the question is, what about subsidies? And it was some of these decisions that we had to make as we went along. Perhaps the biggest issue was the name.
I'm not touching that one.
Well, I think the name, from coming up with the name and actually coming up with a tagline, was something that I learned from Tom with his experience as a mediator. And I've used actually with several other organizations who have gotten hung up on trying to make decisions among 10 or 12 alternatives. That was that we just listed on a piece of paper, each one of us who were on this forming council, our choice of what we thought the three that we would like. And out of that, believe it or not, one of them had the most support of any of the group.
We took 2 or 3 votes, and I still remember Bill Reller going around the boardroom picking up the votes and sort of policing that process. Some of the other names that were offered were Palo Alto Village and Stay at Home. Another was Stasis, which stood for Stay at Home Assistance. Another was Avenidas Plus. Another was Village Connections. Avenidas at Your Service. The Village at Avenidas, which morphed very easily into Avenidas Village.
You know, you have to remember that this was only the 5th village program, 5th or 6th, to open in the country. And while there was a lot of interest in these programs, the word village hadn't really yet been locked in. Yes, there was Beacon Hill Village, but some of the other organizations were not calling themselves villages. And so we kind of made a bet that these organizations more often than not would call themselves villages, and over time people would come to understand that that's what this organization was all about. And I think it was a good bet.
Can you imagine explaining stasis and comparing that to what does Avenidas mean?
Okay, so one question I had was, knowing what you know now, what do you wish you had done differently in the design of the village?
Not much.
Well, one mistake we made two mistakes. You heard the $1,500 figure thrown out. That was my figure to start with, and we wouldn't be arguing about dues increases all this time. The other one, however, was that we decided we didn't know what the load on the staff would be. And so we said, let's start off and we'll cap at 450 people. And then we'll start working again. Well, what we didn't realize is, of course, that first year there were 150 people who joined just for the hell of it, basically, and they weren't going to continue after the first year. And so what happened is that we put the cap on, and then the next renewal came, we dropped to 250 people or thereabouts. And it took us probably 3 years to make that back up. Part of that was also the economy at the time, but that was one of the things that we
Yeah, the renewal was 2008, October.
How many of you were at the opening, or what do we call that, the launch party? Few of you. Well, I have to confess, those of us on staff didn't know what to expect that night, and we were totally overwhelmed. I think we'd, had enough cookies and coffee for, 75 people, and I think we had, more than 400? Vicki and I were beside ourselves. And then we had this rush of signups, and it was wonderful. It really confirmed what we believed was true, which was that there was a great interest in the community in doing this. But making all that work for 450 people was a huge challenge, and that's the reason why we decided to stop taking in new members for a while. And I agree, in hindsight, we paid a price for that. But the flip side is, I think we did a better job for the folks that did sign up that first year, and that was really important to us because we wanted to make sure that we delivered on our promises, and we were concerned that we wouldn't be able to do that if we had to support more than the 450 that signed up. Who knew that would happen?
A couple of the basic questions that we had to wrestle with throughout were the following. What do we get for our money? Our membership money? Is there a cost benefit to joining Avenidas Village? And what will we get at Avenidas Village which is not already available at Avenidas? We struggled with these questions, and I think our history has proven that those decisions were appropriate.
I think one of the things that we really began to worry about and was what kind of services. And I should say that there was part of this formation group was a group of committees, of which I chaired the one on services and vendors. And that was more interesting to me. Here I was at this stage of just turning 60, I guess, when I was doing this, of looking at what laid ahead for the next 30 or 40 years for me. And so the first thing we did as a group, we just researched what are the various plateaus that lie ahead for us. And then with that, we went back and said, okay, what services would we want at different stages of that time? And I had a lot of help from Jan Murphy. Jan Murphy particularly because my spelling is not very good. And she kept correcting everything we wrote. And to Mona Miller, who had a lot of good thoughts of what her needs were now and in the future, and also Mary Minkus on that side. And so we were able to sort of look out all the various services, and then John Sink was on the committee who had access to what services and providers Avenidas already had and was using, and that helped us put together the whole periphery of service providers.
We borrowed a phrase from Beacon Hill Village, which was, we'll try to do anything we can for our members so long as it's legal. And along the way, it was fun to sort of keep track of some of the oddball things that we did for folks. And if I could just tell a quick story, I walked down to the village office one afternoon, and we had a summer intern at the front desk or something like that, somebody relatively new and very young. And I said to her, well, tell me something interesting that happened to you today. What was an unusual phone call that you might have gotten? And she looked at me and she said, well, I got a call this morning from somebody who wanted help finding an appraiser for his slide rule collection. And I looked at her and I said, and do you know what a slide rule is? And she said, well, I didn't, but I do now. And she had found an appraiser by 4 o'clock in the afternoon for the member that had called. So that was legal, and we did it.
And that slide rule collection was owned by Tom Wyman. He also collected tile, exotic tile. I should also thank John Sink, especially for his participation. This is the 21-page organizational plan that was published in January of '07. Thank you, John. John's shaking his head.
I should point out, one of the affiliations with Avenidas that's paid off compared to, I know Lisa gets calls and Amy gets calls and Vicki gets calls from other organizations trying to start up. And one of the things that proved for us is that we got Avenidas Village off the ground probably 3 years faster than the number of other organizations, because we had a structured organization, we had insurance in place, we had office space in place, and we had people who knew how to hire professionals to run a program like this. And that really paid off for Avenidas Village.
We also made the decision early on that the program would be very responsive to its members. And so we didn't have to get it exactly right at the beginning. We just had to be attentive to what folks were telling us and continue to adapt. And we do that to this day. And that was key. It helped us get started faster, and I think it strengthened the program considerably over the years.
Throughout the advisory council meetings, we would admit to each other that this is a work in progress. And we still have that as a goal.
Okay, well, I think that's been a very good discussion. Why don't we just go down and have each of you mention what you see as the biggest successes in the current program.
All of you here is certainly an observation that needs to be mentioned. And we've maintained numbers from the recession, October 2008, above that, but in the upper 300.
We wanted it to be to begin with, and 10 years later, that's exactly what it is.
I can't add anything more.
Okay, well, thank you, panelists, and thank you for the discussion. Now I'm going to turn it back over to our MC for the night.
Thank you all. Thank you for your good early work. And we have a special treat tonight. We're joined by a quartet called The Good Guys, and you can recognize them with their red vests. And I've heard them on their videotape. And as an old quartet member from my early youth, I can say these guys are pretty darn good. So welcome them.
Okay. You're all of the world to me, my love. You make everything so fine. Oh, you make my dream reality, and with you, life is divine. So divine. Say it's only a paper moon, hanging over a cardboard sea, but it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me. Yes, it's only a canvas sky hanging over a muslin tree, but it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me. Without your love, it's a honky-tonk parade. Without your love, it's a melody played in a penny arcade. It's a Barnum and Bailey world, just as It's a melody played in the penny arcade. It's a Barnum and Bailey world, just as phony as it can be. But it wouldn't be make-believe if I had all your love. It's not make-believe. I've got all your love.
Thank you. We're going to close our portion of the program with what we call an "Oh Yeah" song. And so the introduction of this song may not kind of ring into your memory bank, but at some point you'll get that "Oh yeah" move and the heads will start bobbing. And some of you have been really good with the words, by the way, on some of the songs that we've sung, and we can just see it working through the memory banks. And believe it or not, it's a problem for us too. But we're going to sing an "Oh yeah" song for you now that I think you'll remember. Good job.
Oh yeah. On a Sunday morn, sat a maid forlorn, with her sweetheart by her side. Through the window pane, she looked at the rain. We must stay home, Joe, she cried. There's a picnic too at the Old Point View. It's a shame it rained today. Boy drew near, kissed away each tear, and she heard him softly say, here he comes. Wait till the sun shines, Nellie, when the clouds go drifting by. We will be happy, Nellie, don't you grow to cry. Down lovers lane we'll wander, sweethearts, you and I. Wait till the sun shines, Nellie, by